You're listening to the Blue Collar Bible Guy podcast, where we discuss how we live for Jesus in this vast work zone called life. So grab your boots and a good pair of gloves because it's time to punch in. Hello and welcome to the Blue Collar Bible Guy podcast. My name's Mike and I'm the Blue Collar Bible Guy. Thanks for joining me today as we continue our look at living out our Christian faith while we're doing our everyday blue collar jobs. I don't know if you can hear in the background, I'm actually in a truck right now, broke down, waiting for a mechanic to come on out and take care of an issue. So I thought I'd go ahead and get started and do a quick podcast this morning to get into what I said we'd talk about last time, which was Romans 1:16. The reason this subject comes up is I was thinking back on something that happened to me. I guess last year I was working a job as a distributor for a snack cake company, so I would have to go into gas stations and stores and do the orders for the different snack cakes that they need, and I'd have to stock the shelves, take away credits, the normal stuff that happens on a store in a store on a daily basis. But one day we had a real bad thunderstorm, and it was really windy, and when I was walking into a store, my hat blew off, and it took off and blew down the street, and there was no way I was going to get it back. So my McKee Foods hat, it may have been the Little Debbie hat, but either way, the hat that I wore for work blew off my head, and I couldn't get it. So I grabbed my other hat that I kept in my duffel bag, which was my normal hat, and it was a Christian themed hat. So on this hat, it had a little cross picture on it, and right above the cross it said, this message is illegal in 51 countries, Romans 1:16. And so I wore that hat throughout the rest of the day, and actually for quite some time after that. But I had a strange situation wearing that hat that I guess happened in my own mind, because I sort of psyched myself out thinking that maybe the hat was offensive. I was in a gas station. It was owned and operated by some Middle Eastern families, and I don't know why that day I just thought, well, I wonder if this hat is inappropriate for wearing in here. What if I offend these people? And those thoughts kept coming to mind as I went in and out of the store and doing my different things, and there was a couple times where I considered taking the hat off, but I didn't take it off. Partially because what the message on the hat said, taking the hat off would mean that the hat is a lie. And if you know Romans 1:16, it says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to the Jews first and also the Greeks." So this is Paul writing to the church in Rome, explaining that he's not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, even though all of the persecution that he went through, all of the suffering that he went through preaching the gospel, he was not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, because that gospel of Jesus Christ dying on the cross for our sins and raising again from the dead and being resurrected, that one gospel is the power of God unto salvation. Nobody on this earth is going to get saved without hearing that gospel. So no matter what situation we're in, we need to understand that we aren't to be ashamed of what that gospel says, because you and I, if you're saved, couldn't be saved without it. If it saved us because someone was unashamed and willing to tell us the gospel, then we need to be willing to tell it to others as well. We need to be compelled by the Spirit to tell it to others without fear. And we live in a time where fear is everywhere. And the fear, a lot of times, is in our mind, because especially if you live in the United States, you might get some pushback and someone might be offended by what you have to say, but you really have absolutely zero threat of violence for the most part. I mean, there's going to be a rare occasion where somebody might do something, but Paul, he on the other hand, Paul was always under the constant fear of an actual threat, of people stoning him, of people arresting him, people beating him, those sorts of things. And we don't face that. So why are we afraid? Well, mainly it's because our culture tells us that we're supposed to be afraid. Our culture tries to convince us that it's not appropriate at work. It's not appropriate to talk about outside of the church walls. And that's not what the Bible teaches. We were told to go outside of the church to preach the gospel. That means as we go about our daily lives, whether we're at work, whether we're at the grocery store, we need to be finding ways to share the gospel with people and having those conversations. And it's a difficult thing because we do create this fear in our own minds that stops us sometimes. So on this day when I was doing the Little Debbie route, I had those feelings going on that maybe I should take the hat off, that I might be offending somebody, and I didn't do it. Then I went to the next store, which was a little grocery store in Knoll, Missouri, a little tiny town. But I went in there, and for some reason, as soon as I went in, I started thinking maybe I should take it off. Maybe it's not appropriate, and considered taking the hat off. But I kept it on because, again, my hat says that I'm unashamed of the gospel, but by taking it off would mean that I was ashamed of the gospel because I was letting fear get in the way. But anyway, as I did my check-in process. It was a young kid. I think he was 18, 19 years old. Came over and he did the check-in process as he was learning the job. They allowed him to do it for the first time. And he actually looked at my hat and read it and asked, what does that mean? Because, as I said, the hat doesn't actually spell out what the verse says. It just says that this message is illegal in 51 states, or 51 countries, Romans 1:16. And just him asking, what does that mean? I told him, well, what the verse said, that for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to the Jew first and also the Greek. And then he asked, well, what's the gospel of Christ? And it gave me the opportunity to tell him the message of Christ for the first time, that he'd never ever heard it before. And so I got the opportunity to talk to this young kid, this young man, for 5 or 6 minutes before I had to go and put the items on the shelf. I couldn't keep him from his job or keep me from mine, but we did get to talk briefly about that, and I gave him a tract that I had that explained it a little bit more. And so I thought, well, at least he got to hear the gospel. And had I not been wearing that hat, I would have never been given that opportunity, or at least it wouldn't have been that so easily presented to me to be able to give him the gospel, because we probably would have just gone through the process of checking in the product and me going out and putting it on the shelves without ever the subject coming up. But because I was wearing that hat, he asked the question, what does that mean? And I got the opportunity to tell him. I wish I remembered his name. I can't remember it now. The next week, when I went back in to deliver my order, he wasn't there anymore. Apparently, he'd only worked there for a couple of weeks and then went on to another job or went back to school or whatever the case was. And it really sort of hit home that was my one shot. The only time I'd ever met that kid was the one time that he got to hear the gospel. I don't know if he ever accepted Christ. I do know that he has a tract, and I do know that he got to hear the gospel and hear about what Jesus did on the cross, and that we're all sinners, and that the only way to avoid judgment is to put your trust in Jesus Christ for your salvation. So it really has hit home to me for a long time after that I need to not be ashamed of the gospel of Christ. And we're going to see, as we get further and further down the road and closer to Christ's return, it's going to get harder and harder to share the gospel without negative recourse from others. The culture is making it harder and harder, or at least trying to convince us that it's harder and harder and that it's wrong to do and that we need to keep it to ourselves. But Paul says to preach the gospel, be unashamed, because we know for a fact, if you're saved, that it is the power of God unto salvation. It is the one thing that has given you hope for eternity. And we need to be willing to go out and share that word and let the world see what Christ has done for us and what Christ has done for them, if they're just willing to accept that gift and turn from their sins and follow Him. So we're going to see a lot of changes in our culture. I put in a clip here that I wanted you all to hear. It's from a missionary named Paul Washer. He's preached in countries all over the world. He's served as a missionary for many years, preaching the gospel in countries that you do face often severe persecution for sharing your faith. And he at a conference a while back, I think this is 7-8 years old or so, he got to talk on the issue of what it's going to look like as we move further down the road here, even in the United States, to being not allowed to share the gospel without consequences. So take a few minutes here, listen to what Paul Washer has to say, and then at the end I'll share a little bit about what we're going to talk about next time.
The church in America is going to suffer so terribly. And we laugh now, but they will come after us. They will come after our children. They will close the net around us while we are playing soccer mom and soccer dad, while we are arguing over so many little things and mesmerized by so many trinkets. The net even now is closing around you and your children and your grandchildren, and it does not cause you to fear. You will be isolated from society, as has already happened. Anyone who tries to run for office who actually believes the Bible will be considered a lunatic until finally we are silenced. We will be called things that we're not and persecuted not for being followers of Christ, but for being radical fundamentalists who do not know the true way of Christ, which of course is love and tolerance. You'll go down as the greatest bigots and haters of mankind in history. They've already come after your children. And for most of you, they got them. They got them through the public schools and indoctrination, and the university and indoctrination, and then you wonder why your children come out not serving the Lord. It's because you fed them right into the devil's mouth. So little by little, the net is closing around, and then it's not little by little. Look how fast things are going downhill just in a matter of weeks. Matter of weeks. But at the same time, know this. Persecution is always meant for evil, but God always means it for good. And is it not better to suffer in this life, to have an extra weight of glory in heaven? You must settle this in your mind. This is the one thing I want to say over and over. Do not believe. Down through history, you have a wrong idea of martyrdom and persecution. You think that these men were persecuted and martyred for their sincere faith in Jesus Christ. That was the real reason, but no one heard that publicly. They were martyred, and they were persecuted as enemies of the state, as child molesters, as bigots, as narrow-minded, stupid people who had fallen for a ruse and can contribute nothing to society. Your suffering will not be noble. So your mind must be filled with the Word of God when all people persecute you and turn on you. And if the Spirit of God in common grace pulls back and you see even your children and your grandchildren tossing in the lot that you should die. This is no game. You want revival and awakening, but know this. For the most part, great awakenings have come only preceding great national catastrophes or the persecution of the church. I believe God is bringing a great awakening, but I believe that He is raising up young men who are strong in trust in the providence of God to be able to wade through the hell that's going to break loose on us. And it will be on us before we even recognize it. Unless in God's providence, He is not done. He is not done. Now note, this is not silly talk. Apart from a great awakening, these things are going to come upon you. Be ready to lose your homes, your cars, and everything.
So we will leave it right there with that message from Paul Washer, knowing that the persecution and the spiritual attacks are going to get much stronger in the coming days, and it's up to us to be prepared. We've got to remember that this is not a physical battle. We're fighting a spiritual battle, and God has given us His Word, which is 100% sufficient in preparing us for the battle. So that's where we're going to start next time. We're going to start going through the preparation to keep us sharing our faith, to keep us living faithfully in these times and in every situation that we come across as blue-collar Christians, people working the regular jobs out there. And we're going to start that next week, or I don't know, maybe in a few days, going through the armor of God and everything that we need to fight against those fiery darts from the devil. So until next time, my name's Mike. I'm the Blue Collar Bible Guy, and try to stay faithful out there.